Morning, everybody. How did I get into this mess? How did I get into this career? I'm one of those post-war baby boomers who, when I did my A-levels, university wasn't really a thought. I never thought I'd get the grades, let alone have the ability to go to university. So I left school, then got my A-level grades and thought, that looks rather attractive. Went on to university, got chatting in the careers to somebody who talked about marketing, thought that's interesting, investigated it more, and then through the milk round got a marketing traineeship, thoroughly enjoyed it, and after a year, 18 months, moved on to a company called Brook Bond Oxo, PG Tips, Oxo Cubes. From there to the poultry industry, a company called Butterball Foods. Their major competitor, Bernard Matthews, the turkey business, as marketing director. And then the last 20 years of my career I spent within the Meat and Livestock Commission and its successor bodies such as BPEX. The theme all the way through has been marketing. The last 30 years happened to have been poultry and meat. The reason I'm a marketing consultant now is I retired last year, and I'm also doing a bit of work for Seafish now. So it's that whole food side of things that I've always been someone who's needed an interest in what I'm doing. I can't just do things hypothetically. But working with food has always been fantastic. What's marketing? Simplest definition I've ever seen is one that just says simply the identification of consumer demand and its profitable delivery. Now, it's very simple when you put it like that. We all think about the sexy end of things, the TV campaigns, the PR campaigns and all that side of things. But Nigel and I worked together for the last 2 or 3 years before I retired. And he and I did a lot of work together because, quite simply, I haven't got anywhere near the technical knowledge that he has. But we had a demand issue. The demand was from the government. You're not doing a good job on pigs and the environment. Actually, we are. So a combination of Nigel's skills in terms of getting the information together that he's shown us, and my skills on the communication side, came together in some of the reports, presenting to government, to NGOs, etc., and improving the lot of the industry. So that's just sort of a quick example of how things can come together. But what I'm talking about today are these simple headings. Supertanker trends in terms of marketing, some macroeconomic issues within that, then a real-life problem was Horsegate, which we all lived through earlier in the year, a little bit of marketing, then some conclusions. In terms of supertanker trends, then simplistically, the way I've looked at it for many years is 3 of them. Human diet, health and nutrition, sustainability and ethics, which you could say is the new kid on the block, and obviously demand. So taking them one at a time. I think we all know that as a general statement, we're all getting fatter than ever before. You go back there to 1978, and you've got about 5% of the population who were obese, and today we're looking at 25%. Okay, the rate of growth has slowed, which is brilliant. What does obese mean? What are people doing? It's easy to say it's about bad diet. And here you can see the obese people are overdosing, in inverted commas, on the worst nutrients. Energy, protein, fibre, carbohydrate, they're over-indexing, fat, saturated fat. But is it just about diet? Well, the overweight consumer isn't overweight for one reason. They're frequently high red meat consumption, high salt consumption and high sugar consumption. They've got a bad diet. But it's not just about calories in, it's about calories out. And therefore it's the lifestyle issues which frequently outweigh the individual components. Because if we look again at a long-term trend here from 1975, we're consuming more than 10% less calories and fat than we were, 30 years ago. So we're doing something right, even though it's coming out as something wrong. So the theme coming through today is it isn't as simple as it looks. But I think this is much more interesting. It's about attitudes. If you go back to 1995 and just looking at these 3 individual elements, enjoyment, practicality and health, in 1995, so what's that, less than 20 years ago, it was all about practicality. Speed, convenience, everything like that. 55% of meals were put together on the basis of practicality. Only 11% on the basis of health. So in 17 years on the chart there, health has doubled. The reason why people prepare a meal has gone from 11% to 23%. Doubled. Sustainability and ethics. At one time, people who cared about the environment ate brown rice, nut loaf and all things vegan. Wore sandals made from straw and always wore them with socks. But today, it's all of us. We're all concerned about it. And so it really has been a sea change in terms of attitudes again. Nigel drew our attention to the Foresight report, and there's 3 key messages within that. That if we're going to improve, if we're going to get a sustainable planet for ourselves, we need a radical redesign of the global food system. And I stress global there, because it isn't just about us here in England, the UK, EU, it's about the world. Doing nothing is not an option. Everybody has got to do something. And in terms of global policy development, food has got to move much more centre stage. It's not just about building power stations. Food is sitting in the middle there. And biodiversity is a massive part of this if we want to maintain the planet. And here's just a simple example of some of the challenges. In the Amazon basin, the deforestation to produce soy, cotton, livestock and timber. In the Coral Triangle, tuna, live reef fish, aquaculture. In the Indus Delta, rice, cotton and sugarcane. And even in the Arctic there, with fish, cod and pollock. Then it's about the whole of the world and where the strains and stresses are going to be coming. But we need to reduce the emissions across the food chain. And the biggest single chunk there on the right-hand side is agriculture. 40% of all emissions come from agriculture. And 58% of those in the UK are animal production. So very simple, big number focuses there for people and NGOs, government. But the whole climate change thing has spawned a new industry, a new dictionary. Global footprints, carbon footprints. We didn't know these things 10, 15 years ago. Food miles. A few years ago, food miles was the sexy thing. But it was quickly discredited. You know, bringing in fresh beans from Kenya, flying them in the holds of aircraft that would have had empty holds, enabling wealth to be produced in East Africa is a major benefit on balance than just the one-dimensional negative on food miles. We talk more about seasonality. We try and recycle. We look at local produce and local distribution, whole foods, fair trade, fair deal. What do they mean? And waste. In the last week there's been a lot of publicity about waste. Who causes the waste? What the waste is? How we can improve all the time. But will consumers change their consumption habits or not? Well, basically, consumers need to be given solutions, not problems. Don't just tell them you've got to do something, because the solutions have got to be put in front of them. And political parties, retailers, food brands, food manufacturers are all beginning to compete in this space. But in terms of what the consumer might or might not do, then in answer to the question last year, which of any of the following actions would you be prepared to take to reduce your own CO2 emissions? Then the 2 big ones there are recycle more and use lower energy light bulbs. Why? Because you have to. Recycling, we're given the bins. We have to do an element there. You can't buy most of the old light bulbs anymore. We have to buy the lower ones. So if people are given the solutions, they will respond to it. When it comes to real changes in lifestyle, reducing dairy consumption, reducing meat consumption, around the 15-20% mark, it's a big sacrifice that a lot of people see it as making. For what effect? So it's the difference there. Give the solutions with recycling and light bulbs rather than relying on individuals. But it's not a simple thing at the end of the day. Extensive production, the way that things were always done, they're more natural, but you can't produce the big volumes out of them. And in terms of beef, for instance, that means it's grass-fed, which is good, isn't it? But in terms of the numbers that we need today to feed the population there is, we need intensive production, which is much more efficient. So you've got efficiency against natural. You can get the higher volume there rather than the lower volume. But for beef, it means it's going to be grain-fed. So we're back to the arguments Nigel was saying in terms of producing grains that go into animal food. And then in terms of consumers' attitude, fast food, well, it's convenient, isn't it? So it's great. But proper meals are healthy. And where do I as a consumer find this balance? And these are the challenges that consumers are having to live with every day in terms of having an effect on sustainability. And so in terms of the themes that are evolving here, then governments try and lead on the whole thing. The NGOs are pushing. They want action, and they're just going to push. That's their role. Consumers, they're sort of waiting and following. Given the solutions, they'll respond. Retailers, they can't be seen to be taking a back seat on this, can they? So they're responding. And brands the same. So one way or another, all those major elements there are playing their part as far as sustainability and ethics are concerned. Moving on to demand, the third of these supertanker trends. Then Nigel's already shown us figures about population growth. Whether you like it or not, we're about 7 billion at the moment. By 2050 the projection is it's going to be 9 billion. We've got to be able to feed these extra mouths, wherever they may be. In terms of the way things have changed over the last 50 years, then in 1961 there was about 50 million metric tonnes of meat consumed across the world. By 2001, 40 years later, that had increased fourfold. The projection for the next 25 years on from there is it's going to get up to nearly 350 million tonnes. We've got to find ways of doing it. It's all well and good to talk about our needs, but it's the needs of the developing world as well. World meat production has coped. It's increased 5 times since the 1950s. But in developed markets, such as ourselves, where there's existing high meat and dairy product consumption, it's not going forward. If anything, it's coming backward. Population growth is basically slowing or declining. There's an ageing population who eat less. There are the concerns about health. The social pressures we've been talking about greenhouse gas intensive products, efficiency. Lower income groups, they're migrating out of the old-fashioned meats into the new fashion, the white meats. More intensive production, much more efficient and lower cost. But for the higher income groups, they're still into the treats. So again, a difficult position. In terms of world grain production, then again we think about ourselves, don't we? We know the EU produces a massive amount. But who knew that China was the second largest producer, and in a few years' time will be the world's largest producer? India is the third largest. The United States, where we think of the grain belt down the middle of the USA, is only fourth in the world. So massive changes and attitude changes that we've got to take on board. Now, I know beer isn't totally relevant to us, well, maybe one or two of us, but I think it's interesting to look at this chart and look at the changes that have taken place. North America, biggest market, in decline. Western Europe, Eastern Europe, massive markets in decline. But the developing markets, Latin America, Asia, Africa, is where the growth is coming from. This happens to be about beer. It could be about dairy, it could be about meat. The principle is the same. Decline in developed markets, growth coming through in the developing markets. Let's look at some of the factors that affect all this and affect all our lives. The oil price. As we can see, back in 2003 there, $30 a barrel. Now, nearly $130 a barrel. Part of the explanation why we're paying more for our heating, why we're paying more for the fuel in our cars, and why product prices are going up all the time. The wheat price. There was a time when it sort of hovered around the $100 a tonne mark, £100 a tonne rather, for many, many years. Farmers wanted it, grain farmers wanted it over the 100 to make money. The bread industry, pig farmers, chicken farmers wanted it under because of their costs. Shot up there in 07, 08, came back down again, but as we've come through the worst of the recession, then it's picked up again as global demand has returned. What's that meant in terms of food prices? Well, on a global scale, from 1990 to 2006-07, the food price index was basically static. Yes, it went up and down a bit, but nothing significant. But in the last 4 or 5 years, it has rocketed. The food price index has doubled in that period, bringing about all the problems around the world that we are aware of. And in particular, the developing countries. In the Philippines, 50% of the consumer price index is made up of food. Coming down through other Asian countries there, EU and the US about 15%. In terms of the UK, we're under 10% of household expenditure these days that goes on food and non-alcoholic beverages. Less than 10%. We're spending more on cars, on holidays, on heating, on housing, and that's where the money's going. Food is cheap, in inverted commas, in this country compared to, say, the Philippines and Vietnam and countries like that. The retail price index has been basically steady for the last, 20 years. There's been peaks, there's been troughs, but it's been basically steady. But confidence. We've had 2 major problems there in terms of confidence. The recession at the end of the 80s and in the early 90s, and the one that we've been through. We're not out of it yet. Still, consumer confidence is in a negative position, which means consumers aren't happy and prepared to invest in their future. But what does that mean if inflation is ahead of growth? Well, what's happening is that consumers are trading down to cheaper products. They're buying more own label. And we'll see in a minute what's happening with the discounters like Lidl and Aldi. They're shopping more often, buying less. It's not the sort of, oh, I'll just whack it on the credit card any longer. People are thinking about it. Making our food go further. We're into more leftovers. We're not wasting as much. We're looking for the promotions. 3 packs of meat for £10 or whatever it is. More shopping at discounters, as I just said, and more eating in. It's cheaper than eating out. I love this map. What it says is that these individual countries have the same basic GDP as these American states. So Italy, for instance, has the same GDP as California. Russia has the same GDP as Texas. Greece as Washington State. And so on across the map there. So the US, we know, is massive. And to my mind, this is just a reflection of how big it is. 50 plus states there, as big, and you can put populate individual countries in there. So it just shows how big and important the US is to the world economy and how the whole thing is functioning. But the UK grocery market, getting back closer to home, expenditure over 100 billion, 26 million households, each purchasing on average 255 times a year. Now that can be buying a sandwich in a service station, or just going out for a loaf of bread, or it can be doing the big weekly monthly shop. Average trip spend of £15.42 and nearly £4,000 per buyer per year. But in the last 20 years it's changed. You used to go to the baker's to get bread. You got the milkman to bring you the milk, the florist you went to for flowers, the butcher for meat, and so on. But now we get it all from the supermarkets, or a vast majority of it. But who are the supermarkets? Well, Tesco, they want to be everyman. They want every one of us here, everyone in the country to come to them. Asda is seen as down market, but they want to be more than just C2DE. Sainsbury's, they're more mass and upmarket. Morrison's, not really sure where they fit in. Waitrose, the big success story, the ethical consumer. And the discounters are just going like a train at this point in time. In terms of the proportion of under 45-year-old housewives, Asda has the highest proportion, but they have the lowest proportion of ABC1. So it's the younger housewives and down market. Contrast that with Waitrose, who have 65% ABC1, so very much more upmarket. The retailers have developed over the last 10, 12, 15, 20 years. They have centralised off-site packing under contract. So they don't just go, in meat's case, go on Smithfield and buy what was coming in to satisfy. They contract right the way back down the line through the supply chain, often right down to specifying the breed of animal that is going to go through to be in their packs of meat. They have regional distribution centres. So it isn't every manufacturer's lorry coming into store, it's into the distribution centres. Their IT development, loyalty cards, tells them far more about us than they ever knew. The store formats I've talked about, then range tiering. They've all got this concept of good, better, best. So in terms of Sainsbury's, basics, standards, and taste the difference. Another way of looking at it is value, standard plus, and premium. Okay, so what does it mean? In terms of bacon, in Sainsbury's, their basic smoked back bacon, £5.60 a kilogram. You then moved up to their value proposition, £6.66. They've added 15-20% to the price. Dry cured, so we're getting into the better here, £10.91. That's nearly double the price of the basics. By the time you get up to the real premium end of things, £14.55, what's that? 2.5, 2 3/4 times of the basic. It's still bacon. It still delivers the same proposition, maybe in a different way. You've got less fat, you've got dry cured, outdoor bred, oak smoked, rather than a lot of fat and rind, but it's still bacon. Just shows how they can move the consumer through the various sectors. But we've had a lot of change. A decade ago, homemade food was in decline. It's now in growth. Because of the recession, people are having to do it more. Snacking was in growth, it's in decline. Family meals were being replaced by eating alone. Family meals are coming back. And I won't go through it, but it's all there, you can read it later. An interesting chart. Back in 1961, I know it's 50 years ago, but there were 3 peaks of eating. Breakfast, lunch and dinner, with another one there for supper. It smoothed itself out. None of them are as high as they were. There's much more eating through the day, as people want it. But a real life problem with Horsegate. Who are the buyers least likely to be concerned by this scandal? They're more likely to be pre-family, young family, upmarket, live in city and urban dwellings, less likely to eat ready meals. In other words, they didn't see themselves as being really wrapped up in this because they didn't eat those products. Who are least likely to change their concern, but least likely to change their behaviour? Older couples, retired or empty nesters, rural suburban dwellings, more likely to eat fresh meat. Again, doesn't really affect me. But who are the concerned who claim they will change their behaviour? They're likely to be families, C2DE, city and urban dwellings, more likely to eat ready meals. So the people who were eating the products that were deemed to be affected, not surprisingly, were the ones who are going to be wanting to change their behaviour. And what did they do? They cut down on frozen burgers, frozen ready meals, frozen sausages, chilled ready meals, and moved to fresh meat, particularly lamb, turkey and fish. The movement mainly from the red blobs, and the bigger the red blob, the bigger the loss, to the green blobs. The bigger the green blob, the greater the gain. So chilled ready meals, as you can see, went to fresh beef, wet and smoked fish, fresh lamb and fresh chicken. Frozen ready meals went basically to fresh beef, fresh chicken into lamb. So movements there that we can track in terms of what consumers actually did. £32 million was lost across the categories during the scandal. The biggest loss there, frozen ready meals, £16 million. The most concerned shoppers, so the C2DE with families, at points in time buying more than 20% less than they had before. Big changes. And the winner, ladies and gentlemen, was Aldi. Aldi's proposition has been and continues to be about British meat. Even though it's a discounter in terms of the names that are given to these people, because it had had a solid British proposition and continued with it, it gained buyers. One would have expected down market for it to have lost. The loser was Tesco. Okay, they're the biggest, therefore they're going to lose. But even so, I think there's a key message within that about the way that consumers are changing. So, last section. Where to from here? A little bit of marketing. We're all aware of social media and everything that goes with it. If you go back 20 years ago, it's all about reading. We then, around 2000, moved into distribution and commerce. Amazon came in, eBay, Expedia, all these people. Now we're into communication, Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, Talk. And the next one is ROPO, Research Online, Purchase Online. And so the users, as you can see, moving through there from 77 million in 98 to 1.9 billion in 2010. In terms of internet users worldwide, there were 2 billion in 2011. That's going to go up to 5 billion by 2020. Mobile subscribers will double. The digital information in the world is going to go up, what's that, about 30-something times? I don't even know what a zettabyte is, but I assume it's something impressive. The digital ad marketplace is going to double. And there's a rule that says every year the computer chips that we have in our phones and everything else these days, they double in volume, the amount of information held on them, and they halve in price. So if you want to get into an industry, don't get into that one, because you're giving away more and more every year. But it's fundamental to all we do. Consumers have moved. On eBay, there's a purchase made every 2 seconds. Farmville, I don't know how many people have ever used Farmville. There's 30 million people use it every day. And there's 800,000 virtual tractors at £2 each been sold. Amazon, there's 180 Kindle books for every hardback that they sell. Lady Gaga's have 1.5 billion online video views on YouTube. 5 billion apps on the iPhone. And when the Red Cross appeal for Haiti came in, 20% of the donations were made by text in the first week. Insight can now be real time, but it talks about measurement. You can go online, look at these sites. I'm not going to go through it in any way now. You can put in brand names, Coca-Cola, people like that, and you can find out how their advertising is working. So the results are there. Can be read in real time. You can do it, I can do it, for these major brands. Online matters. 2 billion people, 325 billion websites. How the hell these algorithms work them out, I don't know. 500 million on Facebook users, 70% outside the US. The numbers are just enormous all the way through. Despite that, in this country, TV is still, in advertising spend terms, as big as the internet. A couple of years' time, internet will overtake it. But I don't know how many of you are aware of the new John Lewis advert, which I think aired last night for the first time, and airs tonight in The X Factor. I've been told that the 2 minutes advertising, they're paying over £500,000 to ITV to have it shown. They've agreed with ITV that no other ads will be shown in that break. Normally it's 3 to 4 minutes of break, so it's a 2-minute break for the John Lewis ad only. And because it's in The X Factor, they even had to get Simon Powell's approval to reduce that ad break and have one ad in it. Who talks about anything they've seen on YouTube, Twitter, etc. to that scale? TV still has a massive presence. And so in advertising terms, everybody these days talks about social media and everything like that. In terms of effectiveness and efficiency, TV still sits up there. The bar charts on the right-hand side, though, show, say, TV, very little growth. The real losers for a long time now have been newspapers and magazines to a certain extent. Newspapers are struggling to find a new role. Their circulation's going down. They'd all love to go online, but how do you monetize it? The Financial Times has, but it's got a unique product. The Times is desperately trying to, because if you think about Times is owned by News International, which is Sky. Sky know everything about us if we are a Sky subscriber. All our viewing habits and various other things about us. They'd love to know the same with the Times and the Sun. People aren't prepared to commit as much at this point in time. In terms of internet users, we think of ourselves as big. We've got 48 million. But it is 72% of our population. The USA has 227 million, 75% virtually of their population. But look at the future. China is the biggest user of the internet, 298 million people. But it's less than a quarter of their population at the moment. India, 81 million, only 7% of their population. So that's where, as with so many things, we looked at wheat earlier, we looked at development of meat and dairy. China is one of the places for the future. Another place, if you want information about this whole thing, the Internet Advertising Bureau. I just put it up as a screen grab. As you can see, some things it says members only. There's other reports, documents on there which are fascinating in terms of students, in terms of presenting and teaching to students. Go through their massive gold mine of information. So to conclude, supertanker trends affect all food markets, not just here, abroad. Real change is slow. It's a supertanker. That's why it's called that. It takes a long time to manoeuvre it into a new position. You can't ignore sustainability. It's there as part of the future. We in the UK are only a small part of world consumption and production. In the UK, the supermarkets dominate the food industry. Recent changes have seen, in particular, the growth of the discounters. Horse meat crisis came and went. It hasn't had a lasting effect. It was a shock, but it was an in and out shock, not like BSE, not like foot and mouth, which had a longer term effect. Digital media is growing, traditional media is still dominant, and at the end of the day, from someone in my position, never forget the consumer. Thank you.